fine. And you can just pull that out. Or you can move the whole stand, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I think water there would be
Good evening, everyone. We're starting a little bit late. It was a little bit harder to get folks in through the door than we had anticipated, but I just want to say welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Madeline Robinson, and on behalf of the Knox Green Team and the Manitoba Climate Action Team, I'd like to say welcome and thank you to those of you who are here, as well as those who are watching this virtually. I know that everybody has a very busy life, and so to take time out to be here trying to help us as a community start to work toward addressing the climate crisis, I commend you. I would like to acknowledge that those of us in Brandon are on Treaty 2 lands of the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, Dakota Sioux, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, and the Dene, and these people have honored and treasured this land for thousands of years, and we are also in the very heart of the Métis Nation. Before we get started, just a couple of things that I would like to go over. If you are in need of a washroom throughout this workshop, if you go out the back doors and go to the left or to the west, you'll go through another couple doors and you'll see some stairs. If you go down the stairs, there's a men's and a women's washroom. If you go up the stairs, there's a single-use washroom just prior to the kitchen. If you get to the kitchen, it's too far. It'll be on your right. Also, masks are recommended, so we would appreciate it, especially when we get into the table groups that will be a little harder to socially distance, so we appreciate people keeping their masks on. The coffee is on and will be ready by the time we break into table groups, so there will be an opportunity to stretch and have a little bit of coffee and maybe a little treat. I would like to thank Dave Barnes and the Assiniboine Food Forest for giving us our door prizes, 3 bottles of Manitoba maple syrup, so there will be 3 lucky winners later on this evening. And if you haven't signed up for it, then you need to find Bill and sign up. So before I hand this over to Kurt and Durdana and the Manitoba Climate Action Team, I would like to acknowledge that the gathering that we are doing here today is in part due to the energy and passion of a group of folks who participated in a series of climate conversations over the last 2 years. That it was part of an initiative from Kairos, which is a social justice organization that we here at Knox are part of. Some of you who participated are here tonight, and you know who you are, and I just want to say thank you. My heartfelt thanks to you. When all the conversations were said and done, all of those involved decided that it was time for significant city-wide action, and that we needed to work toward being a truly sustainable city, and that's why we are here. The Manitoba Climate Action Team has graciously agreed to help lead us into the next step. And so, with gratitude and a dash of optimism, I will let the Climate Action Team take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. I'm going to take this thing out. Hopefully it won't make a lot of noise when I do this. There. All right. Well, thanks for inviting us to share the evening with you here today. I'm going to give a presentation for 45 minutes or something like that, and then we're going to break into 4 groups. So just to I'm giving you a lowdown of what we're going to do tonight. So there's 4 tables around here, and where we will have more detailed discussions with groups with similar interests on food and agriculture, clean energy, buildings and transportation. I think are the four conversation groups with scribes, because the intention of us coming here today is to not just, spout at you, but instead to engage you in a conversation which has structured around what I'm going to be presenting, but with the intention of trying to, in the conversations, to identify activities and projects and things that your community you think is necessary and would like to undertake when it comes to addressing the climate challenge. Okay, so that's the framework of why we're here and where we're headed. Okay, my presentation is Road to Resilience Energy Solutions, and it's work that we've been doing for about 2 years. I'm going to start, next slide. This is me in the early 80s when I had a little more up here and a little darker down here. And the reason I present this is because I'm an engineer. And you're going to see when we get to the energy solutions that we're proposing an engineered solutions, or at least an engineering approach to the solutions when it comes to the energy component of the climate challenge. Okay, next slide. I have been working, I did 25 years in manufacturing as an engineer, quality control, quality management. And then after seeing Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, if anybody's seen that, I changed careers. And for the last 15 years, I've been working with this young lady, Susan, at Climate Change Connection. So we've been working for 15 years together. She's been working a couple of years longer than I have, educating Manitobans about climate change and working with all kinds of different groups on solution. And this report that I'm going to be sharing with you is the fruit of the labor of some of those groups that have come together to share their ideas. Next slide. And those groups in particular are the 5 nonprofit groups that came together a few years ago to form the Climate Action Team. And you can see their logos there on the slide in front of you. We've got the Green Action Center, Climate Change Connection, which is the group that I've work for, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, and the Wilderness Committee. So we've been working together unofficially for a number of years, but then a couple of years back, when the Manitoba government came out with their Climate and Green Plan, we said that we need to have more community involvement here. And so we got together and had a town hall and had discussions, much like we're going to do tonight, where we collected people's ideas about what should be done, and we said, what are we going to do with this? And we said, well, because we had collected all kinds of notes, and we said, what are we going to do with this? So we put it together and embellished with more subject matter experts and everything, and that's what generated the Road to Resilience. So next slide, please. So the Manitoba's Road to Resilience, which was published and released to the public in February of last year, 2021, it is mostly a narrative that shows us a pathway. It's a comprehensive, it's a complete sort of ideas relative to those chapters that you see there. There's 8 chapters in it, an introduction plus 7 chapters. There's 4 technical chapters, and I'm going to go into the details of the 4 technical chapters in my presentation, and 3 foundational chapters. So besides the technical stuff, there's also, we need to concern ourselves with human impacts of climate change, health, climate justice, generational injustice, etc., green jobs and the economy, and the wilderness and ecology. So those are the 3 foundational chapters. But I'm going to go into the 4 technical chapters here this evening. If you want to look next, just click once. There you go. If you want to download the PDF for yourself, we've only published a few paper copies, but if you want to look at the chapters, you can go onto that website, climateactionmb.ca, and get all of this information. Next slide, please. There you go. Now, so we released this narrative story, the pathway to a climate resilient future, a fossil fuel-free climate resilient future. And then we said, that's great, but as I said at the beginning, I'm an engineer. And if I have a problem to solve, if I can't put numbers to it, I really don't feel as though I've got a handle on the problem. And so that's what Energy Solutions is all about. What we've done is we've taken and quantified the energy problem and quantified a scenario for a potential solution, okay? And I'm going to get into that in the details in a second. But first of all, I'm going to just remind us all, I think we all know that we are, yeah, go ahead to that next slide, go ahead, and talk about why we have to do this. And very briefly, because I think we're all aware of climate change, otherwise you wouldn't be here if you didn't think it was a problem. But of course, next slide, the issue has to do with fossil fuel burning. And the massive amounts of fossil fuel pollution that we put into the atmosphere every single day. And next slide. The consequence of what we've been doing is that we've been increasing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And this graph here, there's not many graphs in my presentation, this is only one of them, that it's not the cumulative carbon in the atmosphere. Instead, this is the rate of introduction of new human-sourced carbon into the atmosphere over the course of time. And even with COVID, we only had a slight dip, and it's coming back up again. So this is what we have to focus on when it comes to energy, the energy that we derive from these carbon sources. Next slide is that because we've been pumping this carbon pollution in the atmosphere, we're now seeing, I think we're all seeing more and more the dramatic impacts of climate change and the changes. If you live in Pakistan, you'll be seeing 50 plus degrees Celsius. I was talking to a guy on the weekend who did an ultra marathon in the Sahara, where one of the competitors died, but it was 59 degrees. Just incredible temperatures. So next slide shows the impact on the planet has to do with our loss of ice in the Antarctic, in the Arctic, in Greenland, etc. Next slide. And here in Manitoba, because we go so far north, there's a considerable amount of our land which is permafrost, meaning that the ground doesn't thaw completely in the summertime. There's still ice below the surface, and that the southern boundary of the permafrost line is moving north. And everything that's built on permafrost is now susceptible to instability. What you see here is actually the rail line to Churchill. And there's a lot of northern communities, next slide, that are dependent on a winter road system that has to be rebuilt every year. There are communities that are not connected by land to the south during the summertime. They depend on cold to freeze the streams and lakes so that they can rebuild a new winter road, and that's the only way that building materials, heating fuel, and a lot of canned goods and food that can make it into the community. So as these winter roads become shorter in duration and less dependable, these communities are truly in peril. Next slide. And of course, there's lots to be said about the consequences to wildlife, including pests that are changing their habitat and their range and moving further north. Next slide. And of course, all of us recognize the severe events. Even last weekend is a consequence of changes in the jet stream and changes in climate. Even though it's a weather event, there are connections to climate and the changes that are happening in climate. Next slide. Including snowstorms. So especially if you live in New York State, and because the Great Lakes are getting warmer, more moisture above the Great Lakes is resulting in massive snowstorms in the northern United States around the Great Lakes. Next slide. And here in Brandon, there's a photograph of 18th Street in 2011. The spring flooding is sort of a perpetual thing in the back of most of our minds every year, every spring. And this year is no exception. There's people around Emerson that are sandbagging, I think, right now. So this is something that we are used to. Next slide. And of course, as we get these floods, the water goes over the land and it picks up whatever is on the land, including nutrients and manure and chemicals, and brings it all into the rivers and streams and lakes, and is part of the reason for the eutrophication that's happening in Lake Winnipeg. Next slide. And drought is also a consequence. Besides the floods, we get the droughts. And with the Prairie Climate Center and their predictions are showing an indication of perhaps more spring flooding and more late season drought, all in the same year. And we're kind of seeing the same thing happening. Next slide. And of course, when things get dry, they catch fire. And next slide. This past summer, this is a photograph from 2021, the last summer, Lytton, BC, a couple of days after they broke the Canadian record of 49.5 degrees Celsius, the entire town burnt down. So those are the consequences of climate change, and why we have to be mindful, and why this is necessary for us to come out on a night that we might otherwise have just watched Netflix. But thank you for coming out and showing your concern for this. And we're going to get the solution in a few minutes here. But before we do, just remember that all of those floods and droughts and fires are primary consequences of climate change, but there's also secondary consequences which are perhaps even more disruptive. And that is, as much as we're going to have to deal with the effects of climate change here, other parts of the world are literally not going to be able to feed themselves. And when they can't feed themselves, they won't stay where they're going to starve, they will move. And when they do move, there's usually people there already who don't necessarily welcome them. And so you wind up with conflicts. And those conflicts result in all kinds. Oh, next slide. There's 2 slides ahead of you here. There's the climate refugees. And next slide is the economic consequences of that. So when you've got wars in the Ukraine or in the Sudan or places where there's climate refugees, there are economic consequences that are often felt globally. So that's where we're headed. One more slide. And before I go into solution, this is maybe the most important alarm that we need to address here. Next slide. This is the Ipcc 1.5 report that came out in 2018, and it shows us how quickly we need to reduce our and go to zero emissions. This chart that you see here is the climate of the planet. The temperature, the average annual temperature is increasing in the squiggly line on the left side, but then it's the projection into the future. If we are going to bend the curve, if you will, and have it flatten out by the end of this century, that's the gray area with different scenarios, they said in this report, what do we need to do? How can we bring this thing under control? Next slide. And they said we need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions on this time scale. And the red lines that you see here, there's 2020 is the first line on the left. That's approximately where this report was sent out. It was 2018. 2030 is the next line. And you can see that according to the different scenarios, it's dictating that we should be our emissions need to be at about 50% of what they are right now and have been. And then that line crosses zero at 2050. That's the third line. So they're predicting, you see it's a band, it's not a line of the curve, but it's saying the longer you wait, the steeper the curve becomes. If you start early, you can maybe flatten it out a little bit, right? But that's what we need to do in order to achieve that stabilization at around 1.52 degrees of Celsius, okay? Next slide. So let's get into solutions. Next slide. We'll start at the international level. In 2015, there actually was a watershed moment when the Paris Climate Accord was signed. And it was signed ultimately by all of the countries of the world. Initially, some didn't sign, but by now, every country in the world has agreed that we need to get off of our reliance on carbon. So that's internationally. That was in 2015. Next slide. We brought that home to Canada, and the Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate Growth and Clean Growth and Climate Change was released 1 year later. That was December 2016. Next slide. And then in 2017, the Manitoba government released their Climate and Green Plan. Next slide. And then a year after that, the Winnipeg City Council signed or passed their climate plan. So, basically 1 year, but now we go from international, national, provincial, municipal, and other municipalities have been taking on and putting together their own climate plans. Selkirk has a really inspiring and inspirational one as well. So, next slide. But there are people like Greta Thunberg who say plans and rhetoric and all of this stuff that you're saying is just blah, blah, blah. Because it's not what you plan to do, it's what you do. And we're not doing nearly enough. And if I look at any of those other plans, I mean, there's some maybe at the federal level, at least there's some talk and a little bit of money, but there's certainly not at the provincial and at the municipal level, anywhere close. And next slide. And here in Manitoba, we recognize there are more and more people in Manitoba that also recognize the need to take action, to take serious action, concerted action. And that's what we're all about. Next slide, with the road to resilience. Now, I'm going to talk about the work that we've done with the road to resilience and the structure of it, and a bit about the narrative and an introduction to the energy solutions. Next slide. I had mentioned at the beginning when I first mentioned the climate, the road to resilience, was that it had 7 chapters, 3 foundational chapters, and 4 technical chapters. These are the 4 technical chapters. So when I say technical, it's like, what do we need to do? Well, we need to develop our climate resilience. Okay, well, what does that mean? We need to be able to meet our essential needs ourselves without fossil fuels. Okay, what are our essential needs? We need to be able to feed ourselves without fossil fuel-based fertilizers and without diesel for the machinery. We need to be able to heat all of our buildings, old and new, without natural gas. And we need to be able to move all goods and people without gasoline or diesel. That's what we need to do to properly address the climate challenge and build true climate resilience here in this province. And we need to use our energy and electricity effectively and efficiently in order to meet that challenge. Next slide, or next click. Go back one. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to talk about all 4 of those topic areas, but the white box is what's contained in the energy solutions document that we published at the end of March. Okay, just to give you a framework. Next slide. This is the first topic, is food and agriculture. Next slide. So we have to feed ourselves without fossil fuel-based fertilizers and without diesel for the machinery. All right, so feeding ourselves means more local food, meaning growing our own as much as possible. These slides, there's 2 or 3, 4 slides here coming up that all relate to the work that's being done by the neighborhood of South Osborne. And they call themselves Sustainable South Osborne, and it's a community initiative where they've taken what was grass by the Churchill Drive and turned it into garden. And it's garden that's managed and supported by the labor of local people. So this used to all just be grass here. Next slide. And part of the benefit is that not only do they get to eat the food that they produce, but they also connect with their neighbors. And so there's a real flourishing of neighborhood camaraderie, spirit in South Osborne. You can feel it, and you can recognize it when you talk to people from South Osborne. Next slide. Another aspect of feeding ourselves means connecting more closely to the producer of the food. And rather than buying carrots from California or New Zealand or whatever, as much as possible to buy local food. And this is direct. There's a website here for Direct Farm Manitoba where you can connect and do customer supported agriculture, CSA. Next slide. And at the production level, of course, there's a difference between food and farming. They're connected, but they are separate. That food just means that you need to put something in your belly, whereas farming includes making enough profit to be able to stay on the farm and be able to make enough money to stay on the farm. And that's a real challenge. But there is a really inspiring program going on, or an initiative that's been started called regenerative agriculture. And there's some practitioners in the room I know that are educating me, which is who I'm not a farmer. But next slide, to talk about some of the things that are necessary in order to have a truly regenerative farm. Regenerative agriculture includes attention to the health of the soil. And in regenerative agriculture, animals, ruminant animals, are part of that solution, building carbon in the soil. And there's a video here, Soil Carbon Cowboys, which includes some producers from around this part of the world, I think North Dakota, that use rotational forage to manage their cattle with a lot of co-benefits. Next slide. But as a homeowner, as a gardener, or even the entire food system, we need to manage the nutrients that go into to replace those fossil fuel-based fertilizers. And so part of that is recycling more of the nutrients in the food system so that food waste gets composted rather than sent to the landfill. And if it's composted, whether it's in your household composter, next slide, or as an agricultural producer, potentially as at an industrial, agricultural, commercial level, next slide, or as this slide shows, at a commercial level. This is called an in-vessel composter, and if you go to the Forks in Winnipeg and go across the footbridge to the south side of the Assiniboine at the Red and Assiniboine Forks, back in the bush, you'll see this machine here, and it picks up the organic waste from all of the restaurants that are at the Forks, and they put it all at one end, and it rotates slowly, and they mix it with the leaves and the browns and everything, and then you get soil at the other end. So that's part of their Project Zero initiative at the Forks. Next slide. So that's food and agriculture. Now we'll go into the technical chapters. Next slide. The technical chapters all address this challenge, okay? I only have 2 slides with numbers like this, but they're important as an engineer. These are important, and they really it is really what gives the Road to Resilience Energy Solutions its uniqueness and its power in my mind. Okay, how big is this problem? This idea of being able to heat all of our buildings, old and new, with electricity, and fuel all of our vehicles electrically. How big is the problem? Well, you can see the numbers in the red line at the bottom. Those numbers came from hydro. In 2018, they were asked by the Public Utility Board to estimate the risk. They called it a risk. I call it an opportunity and a challenge, but of being able to heat and fuel. Okay, what would be required? So you can see that 8,500 for power, and 4,750 for power in that column, okay? And just to explain what that means. There's the difference between power and energy. Power is instantaneous, and it's in watts, megawatts, or gigawatts, okay? Watts. Energy is over the course of power over time, so kilowatt hours. Kilowatts is power, kilowatt hours is what you pay for in your utility bill, and it's power over time, power times time, okay? So this is what hydro is telling us, is that we basically need to add 200% more power capability. In 2017-18, they delivered 4,750 megawatts at its peak. They said if we're going to do this, they would have to add 200% more, okay? Similarly, with energy, they delivered 25,000 gigawatt hours in the year, but they're estimating that we would have to add about 100% more energy. So that's a big challenge. And we said at the beginning of this estimate, we got together a research team with engineering graduates, undergraduates, and economics undergrad. We're still working on the economics portion to see if we, and a much more senior person with a lot of experience who did a yeoman's job, to see if can we do this. And we open up our thinking, do we need nuclear? Do we need new dams in the north? How can we do this? Okay, so let's move forward. Next slide. What we are proposing as a scenario, we're not saying this is the only way to do this. We're not even saying that this will necessarily work with all the nuances. We're learning more as we put this forward and have more people understand it and give us feedback and some of the details. It's really encouraging for me. Okay, start by repatriating electricity. As much as possible, as those contracts that we sell a lot of power, hydro sells a lot of power to Minnesota, Saskatchewan, and other jurisdictions. And under firm contracts or spot market sales. What we're suggesting is that if we calculate the amount of available electricity and use it domestically, it can go a long ways towards solving our problem. The next one is deep retrofits to our building. It talks about making, delivering that much more power, that much more energy. If we can reduce what we need to deliver, it's the same as generating it in the first place. You see what I'm saying? So by making the buildings more efficient, it reduces that demand and gets us closer to the targets. And as we make the buildings more efficient, we connect them to district geothermal. And I'm not talking about geothermal like we're used to, where you go through all the economics and drill holes in your yard. Instead, we're talking about a district utility-run geothermal system. More solar power, commercial and rooftop, more wind power, and the biggest challenge is energy storage. In order to be able to deliver that power, you need to be able to store energy and then deliver it as power. And that's the biggest challenge, right? And so what we're proposing and did analysis on was battery storage systems. Next slide. Okay, so we're looking into these three. Let's start with the first one, buildings. Next slide. Buildings. And we start with buildings, next slide, with new buildings. We have to make our new buildings much more efficient than we have been. I'm going to take a little sip here. Thank you. So we need to make the new buildings as efficient as we can. The federal government has said that they want to move towards a net zero standard. And let's face it, all buildings are built to the code because it's driven by the economics. No, you don't want to put any more cost into the building than you absolutely have to. So everybody builds to code. And so the code needs to go up. And Manitoba is way behind. I think we're running at a 2011 code right now. They're talking about maybe going to 2014, 2018, but they just released the 2020 code in 2022. We're trying to advocate in Sustainable Building Manitoba, it's another group I'm involved with, to adopt the 2020 code as quickly as possible. This building that you see in the slide here, it goes beyond that. It's built to Passive House standards. And Passive House actually is the code in Denmark and other European countries, but here in Manitoba, it's seen as really crazy. But this building is from Gimli, Sandy Hook near Gimli, and the owner built this house. It uses very little excess energy. It's completely off-grid and is built to the Passive House standard. And Eric Bjornsson and his Sundal Performance built the building, and Prairie Architects, I think, was the architect, etc. So new buildings need to be much better. Next slide. But the biggest challenge is existing buildings, making them better. And renovation is disruptive. This house that you see here is in East Kildonan, and they strip off the exterior, all the exterior right down to the framing studs, and build out, this is a Larson truss they call it, to put insulation on the outside of the house, and they raise the roof and put like 2 feet worth of insulation in the attic. And they also did some digging around the foundation, move the windows. It's very disruptive, okay? But it really reduces the amount of energy required. Next slide. Another alternative to that really disruptive, it's all disruptive, but this one is the National Research Council is doing some experimenting with prefabricated exterior energy retrofits, where they build these panels, they take digital photos of the building and then build the panels in a factory and then bring them and attach them to the building. So that's a different approach to deep energy retrofit. Next slide. But then the heat that is required needs to be as efficient as possible. If anybody has resistive baseboard heating in their homes right now, you probably are feeling the pinch when it comes to last winter and your hydro bills. It's really expensive to do it with resistive heat. But if you couple the resistive element in the plenum with geothermal, it makes it much more efficient. And we're working with geothermal experts and and they've helped us put numbers together. Geothermal in this case under a playing field. Next slide. But what we're talking about is in existing neighborhoods. And as I say, I've talked to a North America renowned geothermal installer and designer engineer, and the proposal we're talking about is a deep geothermal wells at the street corners, and then horizontal drilling under boulevards or streets or back lanes between them, and then connections with a hole in the boulevard to 3 houses and connections into the houses as a way to get geothermal into all the houses that currently exist. I'm talking about a grid, it's going to be more complicated than that. But that's the concept, right, of being able to make electric heating much, much more efficient. Excuse me. Next slide. And it would be done, pumping the fluid, water glycol, and shared is called a district heating system, but it has to be managed by a utility, installed by a utility, so that all of the legalities of the thing, the engineering, the insurance, it's all covered by a utility, not by individual homeowners. There's an example in Montreal where there was a co-op that did this in their own neighborhood on their own. And so that's a very forward-thinking example that we can look to. But again, it's one step in being a co-op rather than an individual homeowner, but going to a utility is really what is necessary. We need that coordination. Next slide. So next slide, transportation. So transportation actually is of these three the one that people sort of like zoom towards. Next slide, because we're also talking about electrification of transportation. Everybody talks about Teslas and everything, and we'll get there. But to me, it's the buildings that's the biggest part of the challenge. But when it comes to transportation, the first thing that we can do is travel less. And I think with COVID, we got a real dress rehearsal for this when it comes to, how much travel do we really need? There's a lot of people joining us here that this evening. There's some of us that came out, and bless you for doing that, but there's others that are joining us and they didn't have to move off the couch. Right? And that is an alternative in certain circumstances. And we're learning that we don't necessarily have to drive across town in order to meet with people or drive across the country to meet with grandma. Every weekend, I do with my kids on Zoom. There you go. So reducing the need for travel by virtual travel. Next slide. Also, we don't have to have a vehicle necessarily in order to go short distances. And I have I actually was one of the first directors of Bike Winnipeg, Bike to the Future. So I'm a 4-season cyclist. I'm big onto cycling, but I have to remind cyclists of the limitations of this when it comes to greenhouse gas emission reduction. You can't bring a sheet of plywood home on the bicycle, although I have a friend who moved his entire apartment with a cargo bike in the middle of winter. That was, yeah. Anyways, it can be done, but most of us can't. Anyways, but it is up to 6 kilometers. It's very reasonable as a distance to go. And if you've got infrastructure like this, it makes it more attractive and healthy. Okay, next slide. And if you need a vehicle, do you need to own a vehicle? I don't own a vehicle. I haven't owned a vehicle since 2008. And I get by being a member of Peg City Car Co-op. And so I book the car online for the hour or two that I need it, and I pay for that. I think it's $5 an hour, and then 50 cents a kilometer or something like that. Okay? So I save a lot of money that way. A lot of money, because most people that own cars, you might use it for an hour a day, but you pay for 23 other hours that you're not using it. Okay? So there's that. But the other benefit financially for me was I just find that I shop less. Like when you've got a car, you go, what are you going to do this evening? Well, let's go to the mall. And you go to the mall and you go, oh, that's on sale, let's buy that. And you got stuff that winds up in the basement on a shelf that you don't use. But anyways, next slide. And another way to get around, if it's just a person without a sheet of plywood, is on the bus. And ideally, the bus could be electric. Again, I'm coming from Winnipeg, so therefore I've got a very urban view of things. So forgive me for that. But interurban buses used to be a thing. Greyhound used to go on a regular basis from community to community, and unfortunately that's disappeared. So maybe it can come back. Next slide. But of course, now we're to the electrification. This is a sexy future that everybody looks at and goes, gee, I wish I had the money for an electric car. And I have to say, having experienced them, my daughter-in-law bought one. She bought a new Volkswagen ID4, and I used it at Christmas when we went out for Christmas. The thing is beautiful. It's about a $50,000 car, though, but it's gorgeous, and it was through the mountains, and the thing worked great. So I think we're going to really like these machines when they become more available. Next slide. And this is the graph that shows where the future's headed. Okay, the cost of production of the drivetrain of an internal combustion engine vehicle with about a 500-kilometer range is going up due to inflation. Next slide, or just click. But the cost of production of the drivetrain of an electric vehicle with the same capability, that say 500 range, is coming down exponentially. It still is, in terms of the cost of production. Now, I'm not talking about the cost in the showroom. I'm talking about the cost to the manufacturer, okay? And the cost, those two curves, you don't see it on this graph for some reason, but those two are predicted. This slide was generated in 2017, and it was predicted those two would cross sometime around 2023. And currently, that's kind of looks like it's going to hold true, maybe 2024. So when the cost to the manufacturer crosses, there's a bunch of things that start to happen. With competition, maybe we'll start to see that in the showroom. It may not be immediate, but it certainly makes their profit margin for the manufacturer attractive enough for them to want to do it more. But then when it does appear in the showroom, when you go, if you're in the market for a new car and you can see an internal combustion engine vehicle with the same capability as an electric vehicle, and you know the cost of fueling those two things, and the oil changes that you don't need to do in this one, and the worry-free aspect, you're going to go, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to buy the electric. And as soon as that happens, what happens to the tar sands and all of the commodity that the economy of Alberta is so dependent upon? The market starts to dry up, and therefore the loss of jobs and income, it all starts to come very precipitously. That's why for Albertans, it would be nice to plan ahead and start to move towards that future. Next slide. And it's not just passenger vehicles. It's also all the other kinds of vehicles that use gasoline and diesel that need to change. And it's certainly, we're used to Teslas and Leafs and that kind of passenger car, but now this year, the Lightning, the F-150 Lightning is being made available, so you got your pickup trucks. And Tesla a couple of years ago announced the Tesla Semi, so that type of vehicle is coming. Next slide. And the future cars may not look like cars right now, and they may not be owned. They may be car shares, and the limitation of car shares right now is the distance you have to go to get to the car share. Well, what happens if the car share came to you? And that's what autonomous vehicles might do for us, make the car ownership less and less attractive. Next slide. And then other vehicles as well. I mean, John Deere's prototyping electric farm equipment, but in Road to Resilience, we talk about the potential for producer-made biodiesel. I'm not a fan of biodiesel for Hummers, but biodiesel for tractors makes sense. When you can use between 5 and 10% of your oilseed crop as for biodiesel for the machinery to produce that crop, it starts to make sense. And if you think about it, when we had oxen and draft animals, they had a whole field of oats just for their animals. So it's a similar kind of situation. Anyways, next slide. And again, the farm equipment doesn't necessarily have to have an operator. Next slide. Now let's go into energy and electricity, the last one. The last topic has to do with generating what's needed. Next slide. Well, we talked about repatriating hydro exports. And I just a week ago talked to a retired hydro manager, and he's educating me about this is not as simple as we make it out in our energy solutions document, although there is a potential there. we got to look at seasonality, and we got to look at a lot of other factors. Next slide. But we do need to generate more electricity with wind, commercial wind, and there's a lot of potential for wind in this province, and we're actually starting to connect to Saskatchewan, and the broader we can make the catchment area, if you will, for the wind, the more reliable that wind energy becomes. Next slide. And we proposed part of that deep energy retrofit when we're disrupting all the neighborhoods to install rooftop solar when it makes sense. Next slide. And commercial solar, ground-based solar. This photograph is from Fisher River First Nation. So there are a couple of First Nations in Manitoba. I've worked with Northlands Danish First Nation in northwestern Manitoba, and it has the second largest solar array in that community. So that's another possibility. Next slide. And the last topic is storage. And we did our analysis based on battery storage. And there's 3 battery storage media in our estimation, or in our analysis. The first one is called vehicle to grid. All of those vehicles that are taxing the system needing to be charged can also make charge available when the demand is highest. And the most challenging time in the future is it's 6 o'clock in the morning and it's January 15th. It's 35 below. The sun's not up yet. Everybody's just woken up. They're making toast and they're warming up their houses. The demand for power is maximum at that point. How do we deliver it? If we've been able to store power from the wind and the batteries and even from hydro, and to charge batteries in the background before that moment arrives, then we've got power available from the energy that was stored in it. Got you? So battery to vehicle, but there's all kinds of regulation and connections and things that have to go into that. Next slide. There's home-based batteries. This is a Tesla Powerwall, and you could have a battery in your building that would also deliver that power when needed. And if we have price differential where you're paying a different price at different times of the day, you can charge the battery when the power is cheaper and then sell it back when it's expensive. There's that potential. Okay, next slide. And the last one is commercial battery storage. This is an array of batteries in sea containers, in trailers, and in that kind of thing. So there's that sort of scenario as well. Next slide. In summary, and this one didn't show up at all very well at all. Oh my goodness, should have checked this beforehand. This came from Keynote. Sorry. This was supposed to give me the final summary of where we can do this because it shows you all the percentages and how we beat the percentage by 50%, both the power and energy according to our scenarios. You'll have to download our instead. So, yeah.
Maybe after the discussion we can go on the website and show that.
Yeah.
Drop is there too, like maybe not now.
Actually, I think I can. Yeah, it's. I can show. So sorry.
No, it's okay, but I'm not sure if your laptop is connected.
No, it's not. But I can.
Yeah, but I can.
Here you go. There you go. There it is. There you go. Yeah. But look at, okay, the numbers. The main thing is so that I can remember what they are. So we say that by returning electricity exports, we meet 20% of our power target. We meet 50% of the power target by retrofitting buildings. We make 0% from solar. That's because you can't, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun's not up yet, okay? 20% from wind, 60% from energy storage. Total it all up, 146% of our power demand was with this scenario. And I guess what I'm getting at is this approach is the first time that we've seen it done this way. Instead of just rhetoric and good ideas, we're putting numbers to the solution. And challenge the numbers, great. You know, don't come to me and say you're full of beans completely, because I'm going to come back to you and say, okay, what's your answer? I've identified what the challenge is. I've used those numbers from hydro. I'm not sure 100%, they didn't share completely how it is they came up with those numbers, but we're using those as the benchmark. That's the target. How would you meet those targets? So that's what I would come back to you. And I'm now, that I'm finished my presentation, next slide. Thank you. This is where hopefully I've given you a framework, right, of ideas. Okay, this is what we have to do. Let's talk about it, okay? So that's the end of my presentation. And now we can start to get together into groups to talk about it. And we've got facilitators that are going to be knowledgeable in those topics, or at least they're going to facilitate the conversation in those topics. And we've got 4 tables distributed around the room. We've got food and agriculture here. And David Rourke's going to help us out on that one, because David actually was a major contributor to the food and agriculture chapter in the Road to Resilience magazine that I showed you, and has a book called Fossil Fuel Free Farming, online, $20. It's a great read. Even as a non-farmer, I read the darn thing, and it's actually pretty good. So David's here for food and agriculture. We've got buildings here. What's back there? Energy generation is back there, and that must leave transportation over here. Okay, so if you think about, you're not going to be bound to one of these conversations all evening or whatever. I think we're going to have about 20 minutes or something like that. Yeah, something like 20 minutes or so. So if you want to choose a topic that interests you, and hopefully one of them does at least, and if you go to that area, we'll have scribes as well that'll keep notes of what they hear you say, and you can have just a conversation about it, questions you've got about it, concerns or things you think need to be done, or ideas that you have in these areas. Okay? Yeah, question? Can we go and take a photograph on our phones of that? You actually, if you want to, you can. If you go to climateactionmb.ca, you can download the whole thing, including an Excel spreadsheet. I don't have data. You don't have data? Well, maybe I'll take it. Sure, you can do it right now.
I think it would be a good idea. Thanks.
Yep. Yes?
What table is the coffee at?
Coffee's in the lobby, I think. Good question. That's a great question. I like that question. Coffee's in the lobby. Yeah.
There is coffee at the back in the corner. It's not over the lobby. There's also water, there's some fruit and some cookies, and you're certainly welcome to report yourself before you go to your table.
And I'm open to questions as well. You don't, but I just recognize this is a big room, and people are usually intimidated for asking questions in a room this size. But if you want to ask a question, go ahead. Yes?
Do we have an operating question, or are we just taking commentary at our groups?
Yes.
About how to accomplish?
Yep. Yes?
Just in looking at the numbers for solar, you said it's going to contribute 0. If it were used to power batteries or someone's home, it's going to have a net positive.
Yeah.
It seemed a bit odd to hear that.
Yeah, because I only read out the power column.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, sorry. Okay. The question was, and rightfully so, the question was, I pointed out that solar was going to be contributing 0% to the power challenge, and because it's not dependable power that can be delivered at 6 o'clock in the morning. However, you're absolutely right that coupling both the wind and the solar with battery storage, there's actually the energy component of, I wish I had my computer here, I can give you the number, but read off what it says for the percentage from solar energy. I'll just give you the number because it's substantial. Yeah, 30%, thanks, yeah, exactly, there you go. 30% from solar energy going towards the additional energy that hydro can't provide right now.
So one's on a yearly basis and one's on that peak.
Exactly. One's on an annual basis and one's on a momentary basis. That's why we differentiated. Initially, we had a factor to be able to, realistically, for most of the time, there is a certain amount, percentage you can, 1 to 3, or there's a ratio of solar to dependable solar, especially when you have a broad enough catchment. Like if we had solar from Nova Scotia to Vancouver, for example, then you would be able, and it was connected, you potentially could have reliable power from solar throughout at least 8 hours of the day, even in the middle of winter, right? Any other questions? These are great questions, and I have to remember to repeat the question if you do ask a question. Okay. There's more opportunity for conversation at the discussion groups. So food and agriculture, buildings, transportation, and energy generation. And the facilitators, we got...
Yep, they know where they're going.
They're going to go? I got to get some water.
Yes. So just remember there is coffee in the back as well as a snack if you want. Also know that you can move chairs around. The pews are hard to move, but there are chairs available throughout the building here. And if you need more chairs, let me know. We'll be sure to dig some up for you. Okay?
doesn't work, then I'll take a picture of this. This is what I sent in this person, this one, cut it, and then they can sew it. This doesn't work. Then what about the website? Okay, we'll have a couple of options, so we'll figure it out. Your message. This is the that's what you sent me, right?
Yeah, that's good. That's
I don't. I mean, I whatever you want me to send it to them.
That's we'll take your photo. The photo that you had that you took a photo of.
Mm-hmm. It's the same.
For that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So my question is, you want them to project it here, right? I wasn't sure what to, because my understanding was you wanted to show it to everybody when you were summing up. Because we could.
I thought you just wanted to
No,
give
no.
that guy that.
No. God, sorry, I don't think we're on the same page. So I've already given that guy this, but my thinking was, since when I went there, a couple of people showed me these two guys took photos, right? So I was thinking, we're gonna wrap up, like you'll have facilitators talking from photos, right? And it will be, when you're ending, you say, okay, this is where you are, this is the lunch. So it's kind of nice that you weren't able to see it at that time. So that's why I said, if you want, like, I can give it to them. I can definitely send it to Madeline by.
If you send them that PDF, they can project that PDF.
That's exactly what I'm saying. This is so. I'll just send it to them.
They want to project that PDF.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Sure.
So we don't have to, and that's why I was
That
saying,
would work, yeah.
do you wanna? There's some fruits and. Do you wanna? I love it how you're like in time and. Let me send it on.
Greg or Madeline about how long we want to go. Where is Madeline involved in the conversations, or is she?
No, she is more like, okay, let me get her email and then I'm gonna send it to. Yeah, and I think Car, like, if you just walk around and see that people are still in the flow, and I don't like disturbing people when they're still in the, like, you know, like they had a warm up sometimes and then now people, this is such a good job. And every facilitator is very, very good at set. Like what I'm saying is that facilitators have talk, scribes are writing, so every group they have really facilitate. So I'm just saying that maybe going there and saying 5 minutes, do we wrap
Well,
up?
let's talk to Madeline.
Yeah, like
There she is. Like let her.
no, definitely she will be the one doing that. But I'm just saying that maybe giving some time warning would be.
we're going to give you 5 more minutes, so if you can kind of wrap up, and then we'll all come together and do another wrap up. I'll go and tell it.
take an idea or two that you heard that would be worth sharing with the rest, because there probably would be people that would have preferred to be in all three. Anyway, so if we can start to sort of get your final thoughts down, if you have any final thoughts, but then we're going to get back together to, once you've got your final thoughts together, if you want to come forward here, we're going to ask the scribes and the facilitators to share key ideas that they heard in their groups. Okay? So that's what we're going to do to wrap up. So if everybody can just sort of, finish your last thoughts and capture your last thoughts, if they're on the scribe can capture your last thoughts, and then come forward to, so we're all a little closer together here, so we can share ideas. So I think there was some pretty good conversations that happened. Just overheard great ideas and great questions. Oh, there we go. I'm going to take the microphone. If everybody, this is one of the things you get, people started talking and they want to keep talking. Some people do anyways, and some people run out of energy really quickly. So if we're going to share the ideas from the groups with each other at this point, what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is take this microphone, since it moves, and go to the facilitator of, they're still wrapping up on here, the facilitator from if the facilitators and scribes from these back groups can come forward here, that'd be great. Then we can give you the microphone to share key, something that stands out for you in the conversation that you heard, some ideas or questions, whatever you want to share with others. And of course, we're going to take the scribes that were sometimes typed and sometimes written. We're going to take them all back with us and put them all together and see, and they will help to or contribute to this evolving process. The climate resilience energy solutions, we're still working on our climate resilience economic opportunities. There's going to be a climate resilience food and agriculture, et cetera. So this is an ongoing sort of process here. And ideas and feedback we get from folks like you is helpful for that ongoing evolution of the thing. We're also working on a platform called Citizen Lab, where you can log in and give us your comments to these ideas on a Citizen Lab. So that's what dialogue is what we're talking about here. So with that said, what happened to David Rourke is at the back there getting his coffee, I see. Okay. We'll call on him later. We're calling you, David. Don't get your coffee and come back, because we're going to see if we can't get your ideas. But can we start over here with buildings? Do you have key ideas you want to share, or are you ready to go? Sure. Okay, there you go.
Okay. It's a daunting task with so many good ideas coming out. But in a nutshell, they would be something like this. And a lot of them are building code related, and codes around how communities are structured. Essentially, taking a look at the codes to make sure that they favor more density rather than less density. And yeah, definitely moving towards updating the codes to make sure that energy efficiency is included at a high level for all of them. But while doing that, and noting that a number of folks are saying, hey, it's pretty hard to afford just a house and then to think about upgrading it is pretty daunting, so that there needs to be help from some level to provide the financing for that, maybe as well as doing grid level financing and installation of geothermal. How about grid level support for financing retrofits, really, so it becomes a monthly bill, and which is no more than your utilities would have been because it's so efficient. So those are things that would be really helpful. And yeah, looking at new developments or existing developments to make sure that that it's required to have services within them, because building and transportation, like, they intersect in the efficiency area, and we got to make sure that we build stuff that people can then walk to rather than having to drive everywhere. And one last note about, when we're building things, we need to pay attention to the materials we're using, that not using up the last available wood in the world to build things. So really think creatively about the materials we're using.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, great ideas. And some of those ideas are in the Road to Resilience, but they're also an expansion of, so some new further extension of some of the ideas. And you had mentioned about financing or a grid approach to the deep energy retrofits, similar to what the utility approach to the geothermal. And it is coming. We're working through the numbers when it comes to our economic opportunities document that we're working on. So just hopefully in the next couple of months. We thought we would have it in May, but some new stuff's come to light that I think we're going to need to keep thinking about it. But anyways, so David's still getting his coffee? No, I don't know. Who's subscribed from the transportation group? You're this, okay.
Sure. So for transportation, we have improved gas cars until electric cars can come in. Certain percent of cars have to be electric or else there's fines. Car share in Brandon, you can walk, bike, or e-bike. Incentive to get rid of the car you own, like trade in for an electric car. Recycled used cars. Make buses more convenient. Carpool. Increase of charging stations, temperature adaptive energy / electronics, or keep the battery warm. Cheaper prices. Money for carbon tax goes towards promoting the infrastructure and encourage people to use electric cars. Encourage getting off oil usage. Remove stigmas with electric vehicles, make the change easier and a welcoming attitude. Smaller buses for less gas use. Take care of sidewalks and make them more safe to walk or bike. Prioritize walking over driving. Improve sidewalk care. That's like, because in Brandon they have it, but it can be improved. Make people more aware of the damage to the earth with the gas usage. Bigger cars aren't always better. More information of better transport and energy efficient cars and easy access. Electric vans should be made. And more information about better transport in schools. They could try solar panel cars. And that's it.
Terrific. Wow. Excellent ideas there. That's a good comprehensive list there. I couldn't imagine very many ideas beyond that. That's just really good. Okay, so let's see now. Energy generation. Who is the facilitator? There we go. You want me to hold up the thing? Here, take the microphone. Thank you.
We were not
quite as voluminous as some groups, but we had a good discussion. We started out by looking at the limitations of geothermal and considering how the city might optimize use of new lots as well as empty lots as sites for generating geothermal in future for the community. It does make a lot of sense to do it when developments are being made and lots could be assigned to that. Community cooperatives. We were discussing funding, obviously. If we're going to be asking the city for money, that's not an easy ask. There's not generally money forthcoming. Apparently some models have used community cooperatives to fund. We asked, does the city have a plan? We're lucky enough to have a city employee with us, and we asked, does the city have a plan for energy transition? And the answer is, well, it's ongoing. There are studies ongoing. One of our more challenging members asked, where is Brandon? Are we at the leading edge or are we at the trailing edge?
That's a great question.
And I don't recall anybody stepping up to really take that one by the horns, but we could do so right now, maybe. Yeah, I'll vote for the trailing, just a little bit. What happened to the rebate on solar installation was a question that led us into considerations of Manitoba Hydro and the Manitoba Hydro Act and just what it does to facilitate renewable energy generation, and apparently that's not a whole lot. So there's some study for me at any rate. We asked about methane capture. Methane capture has been proposed at the landfill and I think has been performed at the landfill, but I don't think that has reached a commercial scale. We did discuss the city's plan. So the city is having a civic engagement, as a matter of fact, right now. So we definitely encourage everyone to get involved and contact the city planning department. There is a young lady by the name of Sonikile Tembo who is looking after this, and she will welcome your, if you check City of Brandon on their website, you'll find their planning process is underway. We noted that in energy, they have a net zero focus, which is going to take me to that workshop. I want to go to that and discuss that, because the net zero by 2050 is great as long as we get to the 50% reduction in 2030. If you're not even going to bother trying for a 50% reduction by 2030, then the net zero is really a big zero. It doesn't really matter. So that'll be the message I take to that workshop. We discussed waste to energy. What's ongoing, we're not sure. And we were suggesting that the codes needed to be updated for electric vehicle charging, because it's a very simple matter to lay conduit when buildings are being constructed, a conduit that could certainly handle charging electric vehicles. So citizens, you came out to this evening. There are city sessions now organizing and asking for participation in 3 categories. Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong. Movement, environment, and buildings. And these are soliciting public input. So if you'd like to go and speak to the city government planning department, they're making the plans right now. They want to make a 30-year plan. What kind of Brandon would you like to live in? That's the question they're asking globally. So I'm certainly going to show up and have my 2 bits, and you're all encouraged to do the same. I guess that's where we went.
This is really good, very comprehensive. Yeah, really good. We'll take that home with us and put it together. Okay, and is it David's Oh. There you go. What did you hear?
So for food and agriculture, we focused, like we went more in depth into bigger categories. So we started off with like organic farming versus regenerative ag, like what's the difference, the pros and cons, just what's better maybe for the future. We also went into a term called like net plus, which is going past net zero and even reducing more carbon than net zero. So like, I don't know, creating a positive out of that. And so in that we went into recreating wetlands and riparian areas. We also then went into reduction or ban of food spoilage, which means compost, less production is less reproduction, and then more local production, processing, and selling, which has tons of positives. We went into investing in smart and quality farming equipment can help with preserving like tools and resources. We also we said that having more local initiative on change helps because perhaps the government level isn't as ambitious as local can be. Increasing programming to increase connections between producers and the market, and a good example of that is Farm Day Manitoba in September, and increasing nitrogen alternatives. So, less tilling and rotations increase the nitrogen naturally in the ground. So, I mean, that means you can use less nitrogen, which reduces emissions. And some other alternatives to reduce emissions would be pivot bio and asymbiotic nitrogen, what did I write there? Fixers. We also talked about urban agriculture, and some of the cons is in some cities it's difficult because there's pollution in the air already that can contribute to like worse quality of like the growth. But some of the pros are in like cities like Brandon, which aren't too far along in pollution in that way. That would work well and it would be fairly clean. You can also use smaller garden beds, can produce lots of output, especially like household by household. Hydroponic tower garden also works as well, which is like growing vertically. So that lets you put the drier plants at the top and the wetter ones at the bottom. That way it doesn't lose, like it's what's the word? Anyway, it's better. And we also just added some statistics in there, like some general statistics like current waste in farms and like other like factors is like 30 to 40%. So reducing that could help a lot with the pollution. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great, thank you very much. That was comprehensive. There we go. We'll take that one back too, and retype all those words out into the larger report. Anybody got any further thoughts and questions? Yes.
I wonder if I might make a public announcement. I should have done it while I had the microphone. Thank you so much. Well, my name is Dave Barnes, and I'm here representing the Assiniboine Food Forest. And our goals are to restore and conserve habitat, and also to provide food sustainably for humans and for wildlife, and also to conduct nature education, that is, educate learners of all ages in a thriving natural environment. That's what we hope to do. Now, before coming tonight, I heard there was a $50,000 prize, and so I brought something. That's as cheesy as you can get. We are approaching the city right now with a program that we're calling Rewilding Brandon, and we are hoping to restore a historic beaver pond and wetland on our city property, which the Assiniboine Food Forest occupies. And if we get that done, we figure we can sequester 30 tons of carbon a year in habitat growth, restore a pond and a wetland, and some pretty major tree planting thereafter. And we're looking to transform 40 acres of vacant, weedy invasive weedy field into thriving habitat. So I've prepared a full document just in case the prize committee happened to be here. And all the rest of you Brandonites, watch for Assiniboine Food Forest, check us out. And we hope to be doing a major habitat restoration project. And we plan to fund it all. We're not asking the city for any money, so we're just going to go ahead and find money and do this. Thank you.
Yes, that really sounds inspiring. The technical crew was able to get the slide that didn't work, the summary slide that was supposed to bring it all together, and so you can see that with our proposal, with the scenario that we've worked with, we've got the 146% of the power target and 170% of the energy target, and you can see how that's distributed amongst those 5 different action areas. So again, it's a scenario. It's not necessarily, and it's certainly not the only scenario, but we wanted to come through a workable scenario that solves the challenge that's set at the beginning comprehensively. But next step is we're learning more about the details relative to each of those solutions. There's seasonal aspects of it, like this is one point in time. So just thought we'd put that up for you so that you can see the full picture. So that we're pretty much wrapping up then for the evening. Craig's there. You want to?
So I was with the Zoom group, the folks that joined the live stream. So we had a little different agenda. We didn't work as hard as you all did in this space. But there were a couple of questions that came up. One was about the keeping back Manitoba Hydro exports, right? And their understanding is that those exports are sold at a higher rate than what we pay as consumers here in Manitoba. And how do we deal with that loss of revenue for Manitoba Hydro?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that might be a misconception, actually, because I'm going to use round figures here. Okay. You and I pay about 9 cents a kilowatt hour from the power that we buy from hydro. The average, and there's not a lot of variation for there's 2 types of export contracts. There's a term contract and a spot market contract. A term contract is a firm contract is where they have a contract to deliver such and such a number of megawatt hours or gigawatt hours at a certain price, and that price is about 8 cents. The average or the usual price is about 8 cents. There's some that are lower a little bit, some a little bit higher, but that's about it. So there's about a penny per kilowatt hour differential between the firm contract and what we pay. But the other is the spot market. Now, spot market is when they've got excess power that nobody's using, and if they didn't use it, it would just be water literally over the dam. And they sell that at about 3 cents. So there's a significant difference but they sell a lot more of it. So there's a lot more spot market power that they sell versus the firm power that they sell. But I've also learned that the differential isn't quite as attractive as it might first seem, because there's costs of maintaining the distribution system that we have to pay. We pay about 3 cents a kilowatt hour for making sure that the power lines that get knocked down get replaced and the power poles get replaced and stuff like that. Maintenance of the distribution system, about 3 cents out of the 9. Whereas with the sales to outside the province, the prices, they don't have as much per kilowatt hour, and I didn't get the numbers, but that's, in general, that's what we're talking about, okay?
And then there was a question you talked about in the presentation about changing building codes, and there was concern about natural gas furnaces that are still going in. Do you have a sense of, like in new building, what percentage of furnaces are natural gas? And is there anything happening that this person was suggesting that there be a ban on fossil fuel burning furnaces in Manitoba. Do you have any info about that?
I agree 100%. But there's a lot of there will be a lot of pushback from people who think they have a right to natural gas. And unfortunately, I don't know, virtually all the buildings built today are heated with natural gas, if they can be. If they're in an area that has natural gas distribution in it, it will very likely have natural gas furnace installed. Unless the buyer specifically asks for something else, they will, like there's a new tract of land that's been built and you're going to select which of them that you want, it will have natural gas. And in the average, in the last 6 years, on average, the natural gas distribution system has been growing by 1% per year. So if you look at it, hydro, or the Efficiency Manitoba has a mandate in the legislation that created Efficiency Manitoba, where they're supposed to be reducing the electricity demand by 1.5% a year, and the natural gas demand by 0.75% per year. So if you think about it, if they would just ban the further extension of the natural gas system, they would meet their target. Actually, they would exceed their target. But so it's a fundamental part of the solution is to stop making the problem worse. So I agree with that comment 100%.
We had a condo owner here in Brandon that was very interested in the information about the geothermal developments and wondered how, she might go about approaching her condo association about having some conversation about that. We directed her to the Climate Action MB website. There was a lot of talk about electric vehicles and interest in electric vehicles, talk about the lack of vehicles on the lots currently and the waiting lists that are running like 2 years. And there were questions about people are hearing that there are more vehicles available in places like Ontario and BC because there are provincial incentive programs there. Do we know if there's anything like that coming to Manitoba in the near future?
Great. Okay, so there were 2 questions there, right? There's the one about the vehicles. What was the other one?
Well, lack of access to vehicles.
Oh, the geothermal in the condo.
And then the
Geothermal in the condo, right, okay. So the geothermal in the condo, really, the question with respect to the economics of geothermal has a lot to do with the how long of a time frame you're looking at for doing the calculations for the economics. And a condo, potentially, it depends on whether or not the loan is with the individual or with the property. And there is a concept called PACE, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy Loan, where the loan stays with the property as opposed to with the individual. And the biggest challenge with geothermal is that the payback is less than the time that you're in the building, basically. So if you have to pay back this loan while you're there, then unless you're there for 15 or 20 years, it's not going to pay for itself, depending on the price of energy. So there's an economic challenge there. It's one thing if you own a public building, for example, and you're going to own it for 100 years. In my mind, it's a no-brainer. It should be connected to geothermal because the ownership is there for the length of the equipment by a long shot. And it could be with a condo depending on the form of the condo building, potentially. Like if it's a townhouse or whether it's a multi-floor, it would depend on the condo. That's what I would, because also the costs are different. If it's a multi-floor, the number of wells required is different, et cetera. So there's a lot of complications there. Maybe I'm rambling, sorry. To do with the electrification of vehicles in other provinces versus Manitoba, I don't foresee any likelihood of a rebate from the provincial government during their term in office. It won't happen. I see no indication. I mean, I talked to the people from the provincial government, and they've never made any kind of hint that they would be willing to even consider it. It's just not there. And it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing with respect to incentives anyways. I mean, that we have the solar rebate, which was only in place for a short period of time, and if it's not going to be a longer time, is it worth it? Does it just benefit people that are really wealthy, can afford Teslas anyways? If you have a rebate of $5,000, a lot of times the dealership raises the price by $5,000. So there's a lot of complexity when it comes to rebates, and it's not necessarily a silver bullet. There is an argument that can be made that it definitely had an impact on the uptake of electric in Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia, where they have had a long-running rebate. So it has had, and of course, the more vehicles you get, that means there's more of a drive for a charging network, and that's the chicken and egg I was talking about. That the more vehicles you've got, the more demand for charging network, the more charging network you got, the more demand for vehicles. So they sort of go hand in hand, and if you have a little bit of a poke from a incentive to get things started, it might start that cycle going. But I do think that right now, supply and demand, the demand is far outweighing the supply, even though the vehicles are in the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 range. That people are willing to put out that kind of money for these vehicles and not able to get them because the supply chain's not ramped up. It's been complicated by COVID, of course. I mean, people for a long time weren't able to get into the factories to do anything. So it's a complicated, the supply chain complications are exacerbated by COVID, but there's also an aspect of supply of batteries where all the manufacturers on the planet are trying to get things onto the showroom by this year and next year so there's going to be a while before the supply will catch up to the demand. So
Thanks. Yeah, that answers the questions that we had from the group. There was a lot of conversation about possibilities for creating neighborhood groups where there's sharing of resources, like because we don't have a car share program in Brandon, so could we do something informally just within our own neighborhoods where we're sharing vehicles, we're sharing a mower, we're sharing other items. We don't all have to own them. So we had quite a bit of conversation about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah.
When I was a kid, all of a sudden there was approximately almost 2 blocks or 3 blocks worth of people, and all of a sudden was it I need to borrow some eggs, or I need to borrow sugar, or I need to, and then I even remember as being even a smaller kid, 5 or 7, and all of a sudden it was the same idea, where all of a sudden, yes, my neighbor was a little bit further away, but all of a sudden I'd go and ride my bike, go get some eggs, and then of course, I would hand over sugar to them. So then of course, all of a sudden, or the chickens, or the, whatever it is that we needed to turn around and share, we had done it. So, but even just in the small community that I was living in, my parents would buy a 50-pound bag of brown sugar at a really, like at a restaurant place, and all of a sudden and then we would share it amongst everyone else because somebody else had something else. They had a whole bunch, the one guy, he had a farm. I mean, yes, it was just outside of the town, but all of a sudden he had all the eggs and he had all the chickens. Somebody else had a whole bunch of something else. So if we share our vehicle back and forth, or if we can turn a cheaper price, and then all of a sudden and be able to help out our neighbors, I mean, isn't that the main source of the reason why, in order to, make things go a little bit smoother, as well as also to help out the environment?
Can I add something to that? You have said something very, very nicely. There are 2 things I will add. Eco West Manitoba is an NGO. They help organization in different parts of Manitoba install fast charging stations. So that is something, if you're interested, we can definitely connect you with that group. And second thing I would say that I myself is a member of Facebook group that is called Buy Nothing, Sell Nothing group. I've written a blog on that. So if you don't have that in Brandon, start one, anybody. So the beauty of that group is the rules and regulation is you don't put any political stuff. You don't put any, no like using that platform, promoting anything. It's just you want to share something, you put it there. And people says, okay, I can come and pick it up. Like one time, it was a beautiful earring somebody wanted to give away. And 25 women said, wait, I want it, please consider me. So the lady asked her daughter to pick up a name. And I think my name is Durdana Islam. So she picked my name. I'm like, okay, I'm the lucky one, right? So even if you have a cake, right, that your kids are not having it, post it there, somebody will come and take it within half an hour. So that's a huge way of reducing waste and going to the landfill. Right now, there's one lady that posted that one refugee family is coming from Ukraine, and they're helping this family and posting it that whoever wants to donate, and they were flooded of information that I have this, like furnitures, clothes, even shoes. So that is the kind of unity that what's your name? Julie, that you're talking about. So definitely you can start, and only one person needs to start that group with some rules and regulation, that's it. You live in Brandon, because in Manitoba, I live in Waverly Waste, there's one in Waverly Waste. They ask your address to make sure you're there. Somebody lives in Saint Vital, so it's not even going further away. Sometimes I just walk to the next road where I'm picking up something. And during COVID, what happened is that we'll put the stuff outside, people will come and get it. And one of the ladies, she said, I live all by myself, Durdana. This group is helping me connect with people, and I feel good sharing what I have and getting what I need to. And these are all strangers, or they were strangers now living in the same neighborhood. Now, second point is Go Manitoba is an app that Green Action Center uses, like that we have the program of. So in an app, you just said, this is a ride I need. So whoever is, like, you can connect with that. Like before we go, I just wanted to say is that is, should I just talk about phase 2 now, or you can wrap up and then? We'll wrap up. Yeah. We'll talk about phase 2, yeah. Yeah, so this is phase 1 of the work that we did. We'll go to different organized communities, 5 indigenous communities and 5 settlers communities. So Brandon is the first one we started with, and we're very, very impressed with the warm welcome. First settlers community, yes. So in the next phase that we plan to do is that we'd like to work with 2 indigenous communities and 2 settlers communities who are more interested in learning. In that phase, what would happen is that the way you said, right, sharing and all those things, we have partnered, like Green Action Center is a partnering organization of Manitoba's Climate Action Team. The feedback that we got from your discussion, I will be sending, like, if you decide to go to phase 2, so there is when you decide. So I know Madeline said that community would be interested, because we need that commitment from the community for us to go on for the second phase. So we have a list of workshops that we can offer from Manitoba's Climate Action Team. Vermicomposting is one, backyard composting, how to living green, living well. So all these programs. So our team is gonna come to Brandon. Based on your availability, there will be 10 workshops delivered for free, where community members will come. So if somebody says, we want to know about how to fix a bike, we can bring people, and that's what we will be doing in Sioux Valley, Dakota Nation. So this is how things are, and thank you so much for the amazing welcome, and my heart is filled with gratitude and hope. So thanks. I'll give the mic to Cart. Thanks.
Well, that's a good way to wrap up right there with hope. That's great. I'd like the scribes and the facilitators to stay behind, and we'll take a photo of everybody. But otherwise, I think we've maybe ending on a good note with hope and this idea of just consuming less, like maybe sharing more and consuming less.
Yep. So yeah, before you go, we have a couple things we need to do. First, we need to give away the maple syrup. So Dr. Islam, would you come and draw for us? She doesn't get called that very often, but she is Dr. Durdana Islam.
I'm not a physician, though.
No,
If somebody gets sick,
she's an academic doctor.
Do you mind to take a photo when I do that? Do you mind?
Sadie will do that. She's good at it. Okay, so we have 3 to give away.
I hope I pick my name.
If you do, we'll be suspicious.
Clark's name, that's mine too. Okay, I am not watching, trust me. Do you want to read that, Emily? Yeah?
Oh, I hope I can. Kurt.
Oh,
Kurt
no.
O. Kurt O. Kurt O. There we go. Yeah, no, Kurt O. I knew it wasn't you because it's a K. Okay, and the next one. Pearl Smith.
Congratulations.
Pearl Smith, yay.
This is my one.
And one last one. Be careful.
Oh, that's all good, yeah. It's me.
Maybe. Patty Harms.
Wow.
So Craig will pick that up for her. So that is Manitoba maple syrup that Dave Barnes has made out at the Assiniboine Food Forest, which is just one part of that fabulous food forest out there and the many, many different wonderful things that it does. The only thing I want to say before I say thank you is that we have talked about a lot of things that we can do individually, and those are all good things. And of course, the more each of us do those things, the better it is. But the reality is we need policy change. We need different things happening, different rules, different regulations, different laws. And we have a really great opportunity here in Brandon. Dave Barnes mentioned that they're working on our plan for the next 30 years. This is our chance to get our voice in there and tell them we want something different. But also, we are electing new council in the fall. So you need to be talking to the people that are running for council and telling them that we want something different, okay? So we will be going to phase 2, and there will be more different workshops happening that Durdana will help us organize, but we will also be working toward trying to make some of those policy changes happen, because that's where the big happen. We can't go incremental anymore. We're past the point of incremental. We got to go big or go home. So I hope you're with me, and if you are, we'll keep going. So thank you so much for being here. I can't express how wonderful it is to have so many of you here joining in on this very, very important conversation. I hope you all have a safe drive home. Good night.
We wanted to take a photo.
Oh, right, a photo of facilitators and scribes for sure.